I'll forget to record.
You got the recording going?
Not yet. I'm going to start that now. Right now, I'm setting it up so that we're going to YouTube, live to YouTube now. Okay. All right. Let's see. Record. Where is the recording button? Here, let's see.
And there's the share screen.
Record to cloud. Here we go. Okay. Thank you, Denise. All right. All right. So you ready?
Uh-huh.
Okay. You want to go ahead and do admit all?
Admit all. Yeah, there's 20.
20. Yeah. Go ahead and hit the admit all, Mom.
Got it.
Okay. Here it comes. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, it won't let me turn off the waiting room, so we have to keep admitting them. Oh, welcome everybody to this month's meeting of the Truth and Democracy Coalition. We're gonna have to admit some people for a while, so if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, that would be great. While we admit everybody. All right. Here we go. Okay, welcome everybody. We're admitting people. So we're going to be, so keep yourself muted while we do the presentation. That'd be very helpful. And feel free to introduce yourself in the chat while we let people in here.
Hi, my name is Jennifer. I am a DNC volunteer social ambassador. I met Rich, the host. I met you at a Whittier January 6th event, and I just wanted to hear more about what you had to say about the individual rights and I guess propaganda that has been spreading.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Good to hear from you. Right now, let's see if I can, your picture didn't top, there you are. Your picture didn't pop up to the top. So, but I see you now. Thank you for joining us. Okay. All right, it looks like there's a pause in the number of people coming in, so we'll go ahead and get started. So first, some technical stuff. The audio and video is going to be published. So just keep that in mind. For the first part of the presentation, I'm basically going to be reading and showing some slides. So keep yourself muted. But after that, we're going to open it up for discussion. We're going to take an action, then open it up for discussion. And that would be your opportunity to participate in the discussion. So, and at that time, it would be nice if you would turn on your video camera if you would like to, so that we can get a picture of you for the show that we put together. Okay, so also, I think in the right-hand corner, there's a view button, and you could toggle from speaker view to gallery view and maybe just between the slides and the speaker. So we may keep it in slide share mode for a lot, but that doesn't mean you have to. If you look at the slides, you could toggle that and view whichever way you want to. I'm going to be doing the presentation. I'm going to have the slides. I'm doing it primarily by myself. I mean, I've got my mother here helping me to let people in and to try and monitor things and keep everybody muted. So, but otherwise, I'm not going to be able to see people's faces or their hands raised or even the chat or anything like that. The way Zoom goes, once the screen's up, I'm sitting here reading. I'm not going to be able to see anything. So just keep that in mind. And my mother is here so that if for some reason something happens, she'll be able to speak up and let me know if you can't hear or if I disappear or something like that happens. We're going to be going over a book by Larry Seidentop called Inventing the Individual. So basically what I've done is I'm just going to read my notes, and I put together some slides. They're not really, most of them are mostly pictures, just to give you something to look at rather than just looking at me reading to you. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. They're not spectacular, just pictures I got from the internet, kind of sort of go along with what we're talking about here. But before we start, I want to tell you about the Truth and Democracy Coalition and then tell you about some of our future events. So the Truth and Democracy Coalition was formed to build a pro-democracy movement in America. We educate the public about disinformation, teach people to be critical of the propaganda they consume, and provide critical analysis of current events and social issues. We produce media and educational materials, hold seminars and meetings, work with other organizations, and organize events and activities geared toward building a pro-democracy movement in America. The coalition seeks to build communities of people of different faiths and ideologies to defend and promote democracy locally, nationally, and globally. And we have a monthly meeting every month, and next month we're having Dr. George Simon, who is an internationally recognized expert on manipulators and other problem characters, and the author of 3 best-selling books. He's going to be speaking about recognizing character disturbance in politicians and leaders so that we don't elect them into office and recognize this problem of phenomenon of our time is what he calls it, character disturbance. And that is going to be on March 19th at noon. And you can register for that by going to tinyurl.com/disturbedcharacter. So, and then we have another event coming up in April. Yes, and that will be with diversity, equity, and inclusion expert and organizer Sandhya Jha. And we'll be talking there about why America, having discussion about why America is not a racist nation. And so that more information to come on that. So I think I'm ready to go ahead and begin. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. Oh, jeez. All right. So as many of you may know, I believe that liberalism is under attack from both the right and the left. The right, as we know, wants to own the libs. I wish this. and the left wants to disown them. For example, political labels like neoliberal are used primarily against Democratic candidates for public office and really don't say anything about the racist and fascist agenda of mega extremists. Attacks on liberalism often take the form of ideological propaganda, ideas consistent with fascist or socialist ideologies, whatever the case may be, and sometimes both. And the messages inconsistent with liberal ideas are incorporated into political messaging. These anti-liberal ideas then take root in the minds of activists and the public and fuel confusion, division, and dysfunction. In this era of tribalism, where both sides are organizing around issues of class, race, religion, and ideology, recognizing individual rights may be exactly what we need. The individual is the primary organizing unit in liberal government. Individual rights are the basis of human and civil rights. A focus on individual rights protected by the Constitution can bring us together again. We can rebuild the liberal middle and save our democracy. And that's why I'm doing this presentation and leading this discussion. I think it's important that we understand and appreciate our liberal traditions. That way, we can be aware and recognize when the foundations of our liberal form of government are being undermined. And in any case, someone needs to stand up and defend liberalism. So here we go. Let's see. All right. So Larry Seidentop, in his book, Inventing the Individual, The Origins of Western Liberalism, tells the story of how the individual became the organizing social unit in the Western world. That is, how civil society emerged with its distinction between public and private spheres and its emphasis on the role of conscience and choice. It is the story of how individual moral agency gained public protection with enforceable basic rights and equality before the law. Since the 16th century and the advent of the nation state, people in the West have come to understand society as an association of individuals. Today, we see human beings as individuals with rights and the ability to act as rational agents who can reason and make choices and are in this way equal. Ancient Greeks and Romans understood society differently. They saw it as an association of families, each with their own religious cult. The crucial distinction was not between the public and private spheres, but between the public and domestic spheres. The domestic sphere was understood to be the sphere of the family, not individuals endowed with rights. The domestic sphere was also a sphere of inequality, because inequality of roles was fundamental to ancient worship. The ancient family was like a church. It was not only a civil institution, it was a religious cult as well. The paterfamilias, the oldest male head of the household, acted not only as an autocratic ruler, but also as a high priest. The family was everything. Its memories, rituals, and roles governed social actions and norms. Family worship was the source of personal identity. The only lasting human association in the ancient world was the family, and the basis of that association was religious belief. Fulfilling the obligations of one's role in family worship provided ancient people with an identity and an afterlife. The inviolability of the domestic sphere and the exclusive character of family worship were intimately joined together. The family was the basic unit of social reality. It was a necessary building block of larger social units. Nothing could violate its domain. For larger associations to develop, new gods had to emerge. Each extension of human association required the establishment of a new worship and recognition of a divinity superior to the domestic divinities. Clans, tribes, cities, nations, and empires were all extensions of the family. The primary building block of society in the ancient world was the family. New gods and religions had to be created for larger associations to arise. First came extended families, then clans and tribes, followed by cities and finally nations. The ancient city came into being when several tribes came together by common worship. The city that emerged was a confederation of cults, all modeled on the family and its worship. The worship of successive layers of gods, from family gods to tribal gods to city gods, left no space for individual conscience or choice. Worship consumed ancient people's thoughts and actions. No sphere of life was free from its control. The foundation of the ancient city was the assertion of hereditary religious identity. Family, tribe, and city associations were the core of ancient people's identities. The ancient world did not recognize individual rights. No one could make any claims against the city or its gods. There was no formal liberty of thought or action. Citizens belonged to the city, body, and soul. For citizens to be conquered by an invading enemy meant to lose one's personal identity. At the core of ancient thinking was the assumption of natural inequality. Ancient Greeks and Romans saw the world as naturally unequal. Some people did not have the ability to reason. Reason was an attribute of the ruling class. Slaves were born to be slaves by nature. Everyone had the role they were born into. Ancient Judaism would eventually upend these assumptions by basing the law not on reason, but on a source beyond reason. By the 1st century CE, an important Jewish diaspora brought radical monotheism to the attention of many Greek and Latin-speaking urban dwellers around the Mediterranean. The Apostle Paul, the founder of Christianity and the author of a number of books in the New Testament, founded a community of natural equality. Paul writes that in Christianity, there was no more Greek or Jew, male or female, slave or free. All were equal in God's eyes. Within the church, slave and master were brothers. Where did I go here? Belief in the Christ makes possible the emergence of a primary role shared equally by all, what Seidentop calls the equality of souls. In Paul's writings, we see the emergence of a new sense of justice, founded on the assumption of moral equality rather than on natural inequality. Early Christians saw the crucifixion as a moral revolution. Understanding and immortality could now be obtained through individual moral agency. This opened up a new reality where human beings understood themselves as autonomous agents. As Christianity grew, so did persecution. By the 3rd century, a cult of martyrdom redefined heroism. Roman authorities described martyrs as enemies of the human race because of their insistence on standing alone. Martyrdom demonstrated the exercise of individual will. It rendered the idea of moral equality more tangible and easily remembered. Martyrs made the conscience and will visible. Christian martyrs offered a model of heroism, open to all, a democratic model of heroism. After the era of martyrdom, monks began to cultivate communities of common governance. The movement of monks into the wilderness involved the repudiation of traditional forms of community, in particular the city or polis. By leaving their families and the city, monks offered a world founded on individual conscience. The form of community consistent with the equality of souls was essentially a community of shared values. Saint Benedict, for example, sought to eliminate social distinctions within the monastery. Monasticism associated the ideas of law and of obedience, not with unthinking custom or external force, but with individual consent and the role of conscience. By the 4th century, the concept of the will provided a new foundation for philosophical reflection. In this view, obedience led to understanding, not the other way around. The idea was revolutionary. It undermined the claims that a superior citizen class was born to rule. Some have attributed the birth of the individual to Augustine. He portrayed the will as the middle ground between reason and appetite. This embedded the will in our conception of the self. Self-consciousness undercut mere social identities. The ancient view of the will as merely an act of desire gave way to the concept of the will as a power of the soul distinct from intellect and appetite. Christian belief destroyed the ancient family, that is, the family as a cult or religious association. The religious character of the ancient family made it, rather than the individual, the fundamental social unit. By transferring religious authority from the father to a separate priesthood, the church curtailed the authority of the family head and relaxed the bonds they held over family members. After the fall of the empire, bishops became the de facto rulers of cities. The distinctive thing about the bishop's new urban role was that it was based on an appeal that was democratic rather than aristocratic. The medieval city was more inclusive. The poor and slaves were now considered part of the city. The church had long been a refuge from those excluded from citizenship. The conception of society as founded on natural inequality was giving way to a conception of a society as founded on moral equality, an association of individuals rather than an association of families. The development amounted to nothing less than the emergence of a principal basis for representative government. Monasticism laid the foundations of self-governed communities based on moral equality. Underlying the practice in the early church of electing bishops and abbots, and sometimes even popes, was the principle that superiors should be chosen or elected by those who would be subordinate to them. The principles of the consent of the governed and equality under the law began to emerge. The emphasis on individual will and understanding opened up the way to a new understanding of the foundation of social order. Authority began to be understood as flowing upward. The displacement of moral authority from the family to clergy reveals the subversive side of the new religion. The domestic sphere was no longer beyond public control. The individual began to emerge as the unit of subjection, a social role as well as a moral status. Christian humility required that rulers speak to the conscience of every person, regardless of his or her social condition. Peasant uprisings signaled a willingness to challenge social subordination. The focus on justice became more egalitarian. By the 9th and 10th centuries, ancient slavery virtually disappeared from royal and ecclesiastical estates. The new universality, the attributing of conscience and will to all souls, hoped to sound the death knell of ancient slavery. Christian beliefs provided grounds for an appeal against injustice that had not been available in the ancient world. A new, more egalitarian voice can be heard in medieval protest. Preaching about another world in which God's justice prevailed provided a basis for discontent founded not simply on desperation, but on self-respect. A new sense of social justice was born out of the ashes of natural inequality. With this new sense of human inequality came a new law not based on custom and power, but on universal principles superior to human custom and founded upon equality under the law. The emphasis on individual will and consciousness opened up a new way of understanding the social order. The domestic sphere was no longer inviolable. The individual gained a new role and moral status as the primary unit of subjection. First through monasticism and then by the development of canon law, the church became an example of a unified legal system founded on equal subjection of individuals. Kings were the first to recognize the advantages of this new idea of sovereignty and the jurisdictions over individuals it conferred. As popes claimed sovereignty over their own communities, civic leaders began to view their authority in the same way. By the 12th and 13th centuries, many secular rulers sought to emulate the church's centralized form of governments. Out of the ashes of the struggle for power between popes and kings arose the nation state. The claim of equal subjection to the sovereign authority had remarkable implications. The right to command and the duty to obey were no longer determined by hereditary or customary roles. The recognition of individual conscience and free will democratized the ability to reason, something previously limited to the elite. Canon laws focused on intent, redefining personal responsibility, and creating a sphere of personal autonomy. The assumption of moral equality gave rise to the claim of equal liberty. By the 13th century, lawyers were defending a number of individual rights on the grounds of natural law. Writing to defend Pope Gregory VII's deposition of Emperor Henry IV, 11th century writer Manigault of La Tutenbach argued that the authority of the king was conditional on the consent of the governed. It says, rather than reading that to you, I would just say it was the consent of the governed, that if the king were to engage in tyranny, then the citizens no longer need to be loyal or obey him. By the 13th century, philosophy emerged out of theology. The university came into the scene as something entirely new. It gave individual reason and dissent a public space. Claims of conscience, civil liberties, and government by consent became central themes of the 14th century. For 14th century philosopher William of Ockham, the same person who articulated what is now called Occam's razor, the idea that the simplest explanation is best, also called for equal liberty. For Occam, rational agency was a birthright shared equally by all human beings. Ancient philosophers had focused on fate, pride, and shame, but nominalists like Occam replaced those assumptions with the assertion of individual rights. Occam's theory of natural rights subjected the ancient idea of natural law to the golden rule, to love your neighbor as yourself. The golden rule introduced a principle of justice that overthrew the ancient assumption of natural inequality. For Ockham, the power of rulers should be limited by the rights of their subjects. Human agency and divine agency were joined in Ockham's mind by claims of right reason and natural rights. Those claims protected the role of individual conscience. The individual reemerged and burst into the scene during the Italian Renaissance. The Renaissance and the Reformation threw off the shackles of religious authority. Liberal secularism in Europe came to be understood as essentially anti-religious. At the same time, the conviction that uncoerced belief provides the true foundation for legitimate authority was a product of Christianity. It encapsulated the reflections on the role of conscience by canon lawyers, theologians, and philosophers from the 12th to 15th centuries. The egalitarian understanding of society implied by the idea of sovereignty of morally equal individuals dispersed moral authority in a way incompatible with the ancient view of authority as ownership or dominion. Claims of authority had to make sense and even be acceptable to individual conscience. The vision provided the deep moral foundation for constitutionalism and the formal dispersal of authority and power. The belief in a fundamental equality of status as the proper basis for a legal system, a defense of individual liberty through the assertion of fundamental or natural rights, and the conclusion that only a representative form of a government is appropriate for society, are all rooted in the assumption of moral equality. The egalitarian moral intuitions generated by the care of individual souls not only undermined slavery, it became a formidable weapon when combined with the idea of sovereignty. Creating a sovereign authority provided a means of liberating people from the ties of inherited status and custom. The understanding of authority as the delegation of power by consent would lead to the emergence of representative government. It's conventional to say that the doctrines of liberalism and secularism first raised their heads in the early modern period, but it actually emerged in fits and starts over several centuries. The history of the development of liberal secularism, from 16th century natural rights theory through the writings of Grotius and Hobbes, Locke, to early 19th century thinkers such as Constant, Tocqueville, and J.S. Mill, might be described as the liberal moment in European history. The sequence began with insistence on equality of status, moved on to the assertion of a range of basic human rights, and concluded with the case for self-government. From Hobbes' insistence on basic human equality in preparation for defining sovereignty in terms of equal subjection, through Locke's defense of human freedom by identifying a range of natural rights, to Rousseau's making the case for sovereignty of the people and self-government. Each of these three steps in modern political thought had its counterpart in the evolution of medieval canon law. These proto-liberal beliefs only came together in the 16th century when they were deployed against the church's claim to have the right to enforce belief. Liberal secularism sought to limit the role of government through a structure of fundamental rights that created and protected a sphere of individual freedom, a private sphere. The crux of secularism is that the belief in moral equality means that humans should be free to make their own decisions, a sphere of conscience and free action. In the United States, the absence of both a monolithic church and aristocracy meant that Americans instinctively grasped the moral symmetry between secularism, with its prized civil liberty, and religion, where secularism creates the necessary condition for authentic belief. The first is to reduce liberalism to the endorsement of market economies, as in the allegation of neoliberalism. The second he calls individualism, the retreat into the private sphere of family and friends at the expense of civic spirit and political participation. Now, as you know, there we go. I believe that liberalism is under attack from both the left and the right. The right wants to own the libs and the left wants to disown them. By this, I mean that on the left as well as on the right, there are propagandists, both foreign and domestic, who are hostile toward liberalism. Our democracy and our system of government are liberal institutions. The Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution sprung forth from the liberalism of the Enlightenment. I'm not ashamed to defend our liberal democracy. It is based on individual rights. One person, one vote. Human and civil rights arose from the recognition of individual conscience. We protect the role of dissent and free speech because we believe in individual conscience. People have the right to make their own choices and to participate equally in society. The right to equal protection of the law is based on the idea that individuals have rights. Any attack on the foundations of our liberal form of government is an attack on our democracy. That doesn't matter whether it comes from a source we like or from one we despise. In fact, it's more dangerous when it comes from someone we respect and admire. People can be on our side and still be wrong. It's also important to recognize that socialism isn't liberalism. It's a radical ideology that is different from liberalism. It focuses on class and class conscience. It also believes in revolution rather than incremental change. Attacks on liberalism on the left are often ideological. Propagandists use race, religion, and ideology, among other things, to divide us. Some of these propagandists don't have our best interest at heart. The truth is, we really don't know our leaders. We are presented with an image of them, but we don't know who they really are. They might be good people seeking to change the world, but even they have conflicts and multiple motives and agendas. The care with which one composes their propaganda tells us something about the person and group disseminating it. Whether it's intentional disinformation or simply misinformation, the ideas we are exposed to by the propaganda we consume can be misleading, divisive, and even destructive. In other words, don't believe everything you hear and read, even if it comes from someone you admire and respect. On December 18th, last year, I received a piece of propaganda that prompted me to do this presentation. I saw it as an example of the attack on liberalism coming from the left, and I wanted to counter it right away. It came in the form of an email, a fundraising campaign. By the way, I define propaganda as any persuasive materials disseminated to the public. Hence, advertising, much of the news media, political messaging, and fundraising campaigns are all forms of propaganda. We must be critical of the propaganda we consume. The email came from Angela Davis on behalf of Jewish Voice for Peace. In that email, in bold and in large font, she wrote, "To win, we must move past the insidious individualism that keeps us separate and powerless." Notice, this is not the individualism Seidentop warns us about, the individualism that focuses only on one's personal life rather than one's role in public discussions and decision-making. Our rights as individuals actually make us powerful. It is as individuals that we participate in the common good. It is as individuals that we reserve the right to dissent. We participate in social movements and self-governance as individuals. Socialists are currently working to develop a race-class consciousness. Yet, the very foundation of our liberal democracy rests on individual rights. You may say, well, we can have a race-class consciousness and respect individual rights. But the question remains here, why liberalism? There are so many more important things to condemn. There's fascism, racism, conspiracy theories, and all sorts of falsehood. Is individualism really insidious? Is the fact that we are individuals really what's separating us and making us powerless? If this really the message that needs to be put in an enlarged and bolded text, maybe it was just a guilt trip. Give us money. Don't be selfish. Give us money. But it's still wrong. Should we then give our individuality and power over to the group? Angela Davis may think so, and she may have her motives for saying so. But individual rights is the basis of human and civil rights and the basis of our freedoms and our liberal form of government. No matter what you think about her and Jewish Voice for Peace, Davis's attack on the individual was both unnecessary and misleading. The fact that we are individuals does not divide us, but makes us stronger. Individualism is not an insidious threat to our unity. We have the right to be individuals with our own conscience and opinions and the equal right to participate. There are things that separate us. Being individuals is not one of them. So now what I would like to do is ask you to engage in an action with me, which is to write an email to, let me stop the share. To Stephanie Fox, the director of JVP, and I'm going to put that email up here on the screen if I can. Let's see. Okay. This is our guest, by the way, for the following. So this is the letter I drafted. I'm going to put a link to into the chat. I'm going to actually put the file in the chat. Then I'm going to actually copy and paste this into the chat so that you will have it. It says, on December 18th of last year, you disseminated a fundraising appeal in which Angela Davis, in enlarged and in bold text, described individualism as insidious. Of all the threats to mankind, from corruption to bigotry to war, individualism poses no real threat. Instead, the individual and individual rights are the foundation of liberal democracy. The individual is the basic social role in democracy. Democracy is based on the principle of one person, one vote. Individual conscience and the right to dissent is not insidious. It is instead the basis of our freedoms. Individual rights are the basis of human and civil rights. Our very freedoms and liberty are founded upon our rights as individuals to be treated equally under the law. The individual is fundamental to our liberal form of government. Of the many things that divide us, from race to religion and now ideology, the fact that we are individuals with rights and freedoms is not what separates and keeps us powerless. It is what empowers and unifies us as a nation, an association of individuals. The fact that we have rights and the freedom to act and think for ourselves empowers us. What keeps us separate is the tribalism and bigotry propagandists use to divide us. Our freedom of speech and the right to dissent as individuals is a threat to no one except the fascist and authoritarian leaders who wish to impose their ideology on the rest of us. Ms. Davis's attack on individualism is an attack on liberalism, is an assault on our democracy, which is based on the right of every citizen to participate in the governance of their community. Ms. Davis's attack on individualism is ideological anti-liberal propaganda. It undermines our democracy because democracy is based on individual conscience and the individual ability to act as a moral decision maker. While individualism taken to the extreme may lead the individual away from civic participation and the concerns of the community, the fact that we are separate and unique individuals does not separate or divide us. It makes us powerful and unified as an association of individuals with rights and responsibilities in our community. Foreign and domestic propagandists are disseminating anti-liberal messaging to both the right and the left. Liberal democracy is under attack in America and around the world. We are working to defend democracy and voting rights so that no individual citizen can be denied their basic right to vote. We are fighting to keep our democracy and democracies around the world from backsliding. Ms. Davis's anti-liberal message undermines our efforts. For all the above reasons, we demand that you cease and desist from disseminating anti-liberal propaganda. So I'm going to go ahead and let's see if I can copy that here. All right. So I'm going to post that into the chat here, if I can find the chat. Okay. All right, there you go. So while people are taking that or writing their own letter, and the email address is it there? Did I put it in there? Yeah, director@jvp.org. Now, at this time, I'd also like to open it up to discussion. So if you would like to say something, just raise your hand electronically, and I'll be able to unmute you here. If I can get myself back. All right. So, hey, I see Ralph's here. Hey, Ralph, how you doing? Haven't seen you in a while. Ralph Westfall. So, let me look at the chat here. Okay. All right. While people are thinking about raising their hands, I'm going to try and share. See what I can if I can share a file here. Okay. All right, so I just shared the file in PF or Word format, I believe it is. So you can take that if you like, and go ahead and work on your letter to the editor. But if, you know, I've just said a lot, so if somebody wants to comment or has anything to say, just put your hand up here. Yeah. All right, David, go ahead and unmute. Or Ralph Westfall. I'm sorry. I'm used to calling him David. Go ahead and unmute, David.
How do we do that?
All right, I can barely hear you. Now you're muted.
Muted now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
That's it.
Hey, David, how you
I'm
doing?
Bill. I'm Dave's friend,
Hey.
and I wanted to make a comment. So my comment was, I noticed that you put up about 5 principles of liberal democracy, and mentioned the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights as being examples of liberal democratic documents. Now, I think this is all fine on a rhetorical level, but we're not connecting with history. Because if we connect it with history, we notice that the United States was founded on the legitimation of slavery, excluded American Indians, and excluded women. And you mentioned individualism applies to everybody, but yet American liberal democracy, as founded and perpetuated for maybe 100 years after the founding, excluded at least 75% of the population. My comment.
You know, one of my comments to that is,
I'll put it this way: liberal democracy is more aspirational than reality.
well, what I would say is, even though I went through all this history and see how it started in fits and starts, and we also still have authoritarian governments out here. And in many ways, we're still in this struggle between the rights of individual consciousness and self-government versus authoritarian forms of government. We're still in that conflict. We haven't, and even though it may seem like all these ideas came out very early, they still didn't take root in governments. We still had authoritarian governments. We still have these problems. And even when we have started to found a democracy, we still carried with us the same inequalities and prejudices and bigotries that we had. And it's a process, incremental change. It's a process of trying to become better and better over time, trying to recognize our failings and our flaws. It's not a condemnation of liberalism or an idea that democracy doesn't exist in reality. It does, but it's not perfect, and it's got a lot of flaws, and there is progress that we had to go through, and we did make change. One of the things we recognize is we did this 1964 Civil Voting Rights Act. We did affirmative action. We did a lot of things to try to address those problems. We eventually gave women the right to vote. It's not that we were flawed from the get-go, although we were flawed, and we've been flawed, and we're still flawed. And we still have room for growth and still have room for improvement. And we're still fighting this battle between authoritarianism and liberal democracy. So I think I think you're right, David, that we've missed the mark in many ways, but that doesn't mean that we're on the wrong track.
Thank you. I think that your amplification was slightly clarifying. And my name is Bill. This is Dave.
Oh, yes, I know. I know, Dave. Thank you, Bill. All
Can you
right.
see the
Jeffrey,
chat?
you wanted to say something?
Richard, can you see the chat?
I can't see the chat. Oh, well, I can go look at the chat. Are
Yeah,
there
there's
questions
no
in the
question.
chat?
Yeah, there's questions in the chat.
I had no idea it all started like that. For one. Secondly, so all this is just so basically in the beginning we had no rights, only the hierarchy had rights, and as time went on we progressed and gained rights. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And we're still in that process of recognizing and gaining rights. And we're still in the struggle against authoritarian regimes and fascism and authoritarianism. We're still engaged in that struggle.
Like Israel and Palestine, for example. We did not free the Jewish people just for them to turn into fascists themselves.
That's right. That's right. So let me go ahead and look at it.
Oh, yeah, Richard, somebody's asking if you're against Jewish Voice for Peace as a whole.
No, I'm not against Jews. Yeah, Mom, maybe you can help me with that. Maybe you can read the questions from the chat. That would be helpful. No, I'm not against Jewish Voice for Peace. What I'm for is it stopping the anti-liberal propaganda that's being disseminated by, and maybe unconsciously or not really aware, or the ideological nature of the propaganda that's being consumed. That statement had no place in that email, and it wasn't explained in any way. It just sort of came out of the blue. So that's the problem. It's the dissemination of propaganda. And sometimes it's through sources that are on our side, sources that we like, sources that are even doing something good, sources that are fighting for justice because of ideological differences.
Such as the Jewish Voice for Peace is doing a great job in a lot of ways, right?
Yes. And what I'm asking them to do is not to disseminate, to counter their efforts to work against themselves by disseminating anti-liberal propaganda. Because liberalism is, I've explained that. So that's the only goal here. It's not against Jewish Voice for Peace or against, I think it's very important that we counter this propaganda because it's being disseminated to us. So I don't really listen, unfortunately, maybe I should, but I don't listen to or watch any of the right-wing media. But I'm absorbed in the left-wing media. When I see this, I'm like, this is part of the attack. Because what happens is that they end up allied with the fascist. They end up on the same position as the fascist has. That anti-democratic. And we can look at what's coming out about the war in Ukraine. Putin apologist coming forward. And this is all consistent with Putin's propaganda. Putin's propaganda is anti-American, anti-liberal, anti-Western world. And so if we allow that type of propaganda to seek in, it creates an attitude, because propaganda is about attitude. It's not about facts. The facts may be true. It's the attitude that it creates. And if we become anti-American in our attitude, anti-democracy, anti-liberal, that's going to affect our ability both to unify. It's going to push us to the extremes. And my goal is to rebuild the liberal middle so that we can regain our democracy and not be pushed, because right now the extremes are trying to control us ideologically, trying to control our minds in a way. Tell us, that the fact that we're individuals is insidious. It's not. It's not insidious, and we need to be aware when that happens and try to put a stop to it. In defense of our liberal democracy and our liberal form of government and our way of life. Go ahead, Mom. What's another
Martha
question?
Ward,
We got.
Martha
Go ahead.
Ward Hendren says, can't we be individuals with separate minds, yet still look out for the whole community?
Yes, I think that's important. And I think that's sort of the balance between it's not individualism is insidious, but we have to focus on the rights of community. That's what our role is as individuals with moral conscience, to participate in the governance of our communities. And so, yes, it's very important. It's very much a part of it. So we've got Stephanie who wants to speak, I think. Let me put her up here. Go ahead, Stephanie, unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. All right. Okay, Mom, you want to read another question?
I'm trying to find one.
Okay.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I hope you can still take my
Yes, yes,
question.
please.
Apologies. I'm like on my phone and I'm walking the dogs, and I was listening as I'm doing this. So forgive me if there's a little bit of noise. I thank you so much for the time and that you put into this and explanation. It's been really enlightening and fascinating.
Thank you.
And I was thinking, as far as your concern with what Angela Davis had said, I think that because I agree that the individual rights are the basis of our liberal democracy, but I do understand from being an activist and trying to get more people involved, that so often we run up against the struggle against people saying, well, we've got rights, I'm concerned about, I think what she's trying to do is get past people's concern for the immediate vicinity of their own personhood. And so what happens is when that happens, we often dilute our power too. And some of the biggest gains have been made in civil rights by people realizing that as a whole, or for their community, that they needed to focus on the gains as a whole of whether it be women or whether it be, African Americans or it be Latinos. Sometimes it's a matter of, hey, look beyond yourself, look at this for your brothers and sisters. And when we get to a point when we can extend the concept of our brother and sisters to everybody across race and creed and religion, then I think we truly will be at that point where we can talk about individual rights are just individual rights and the complete basis of our liberal democracy. But sometimes in the meantime to get the people, their energies harnessed. I mean, we have to make it clear to people it's, we have to look beyond just ourselves, don't we have, at one point I remember I was working on, I was at school and I had a guy who told me, why are women like, I don't know what you guys are so worried about. You guys got the right to vote. You have your rights. No, there's a lot that we see attacks right now, on, our autonomy. So just because you have a right, that is technically recognized by law doesn't mean that there aren't people who are looking to take it away from you, which, we've seen very recently, and the attacks keep coming. But there are people who say, well, you have the right to vote, you have the right now to, make your own decisions, but not completely. So I want to just, to that point, just point that out. And again, you've given me a lot to think about. Maybe it's a matter of finding a middle ground in the way of expressing these things and these concerns. And, maybe there's more explanation needed. And so I do appreciate you creating this forum for discussing it. Thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you, Stephanie, so much for your comments. I really appreciate them. One of the things that when I saw what she wrote, and we're separate and powerless, which is different from what you said. What you said was that we still have being focused on one's personal lives too much and our personal self-interest. That's something that Seidentop mentioned as a problem with individualism. But it's not what she said. She said something fundamentally different, which is more fundamental to the individual rights, that we are somehow separate and thereby made powerless. Sometimes we give our people we like the benefit of the doubt a lot of times, whereas if somebody on the right had said that, we would be, that's a fascist. We might say that's a fascist who wants authoritarian control. But when it's said by somebody we respect, we want to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Mhm.
The only concern I have is it's not what she said. If she had said something like, we need to focus on the community, I would have said, yeah, that makes sense. But separate and powerless just because we're individuals. And I think also because this type of ideology can be insidious. It sinks in, it gets into our heads and we don't understand. But this is a process of enlightenment in the sense of letting people know what the foundations and origins of our liberal democracy are, and the rights and the importance of the rights of the individual, so that we don't get confused. It's not that we're separate and powerless because we're individuals. It's because people sometimes are so focused on their own personal lives and don't really care about other people. And obviously there are still strides we need to make, both internationally and in our nation, with making sure that people are not being beat by police and so forth. So thank you, Stephanie, very much. I appreciate your comments. Is that you, Jeffrey?
Yeah, like in Cop City.
Cop City.
That's what they call. That's what we're calling it.
Oh, Cop City. Yeah, I haven't heard of that, Jeffrey. So yeah, but there's abuse of authority. I think we're under recognizing the human nature and the tendency of human beings to abuse their authority and abuse their power, and human nature. And so we are constantly in the process of looking for someone to blame for our problems. And it may be that our problems are just, a lot of times people are selfish and so forth. But anyway, you see any other comments or questions in the chat?
Comment here. Susan Rico says, I think it's important to distinguish that the liberalism you're speaking of is frequently called classical liberalism, to distinguish it from the modern use of the word and more aligned with libertarianism today.
Yes, it is classical liberalism. I would say absolutely classical liberalism. But I think that sometimes we make these distinctions. And obviously, when people use the word liberal, that's important. What do we mean when we use it? Do we mean libertarian? I generally don't. And when the right says liberal, they mean socialist, is what they mean. They mean progressive. And when the left says liberal, they mean neoliberalism or some negative thing. So about liberalism.
So what
So-
is your definition of liberalism?
Well, I think the classical liberalism is what I'm talking about here. Classical liberalism, individual rights and democracy and equal treatment under the law.
What about
and I think some-
progressivism?
Progressivism tends to be associated in my mind with socialism.
Is that a bad thing?
Well, I think about socialism is I'm not a socialist because I don't believe in Marx's ideas. And when we talk about socialism, what we often are referring to, we're thinking more of social democracies like in Northern Europe, Sweden, and so forth.
Can't
with-
can't they be combined in a way, like libertarian democracy and socialism? Because I think they both work.
I think they can be, well, I think we have social democracies, which I think is what you're talking about. And those are, I think those are great. I think that's what we're talking about. But when we talk about socialism itself as an ideology, and we start to get into a conflict between these principles, ideological principles, like this is, then we start to develop this ideological struggle that they're not completely compatible. Socialism and liberalism are not completely compatible ideologically, but we can have social policies like social democracy where we provide services, we protect equal rights, we protect people's rights, and we provide for the basic needs of the community. I think in some sense, when people talk about socialism, when they mean that, that's perfectly fine. I'm in support of that, but it's not necessarily the proletariat versus the bourgeoisies and the emphasis on markets and the economy rather than on the political structure and social and rights and liberties and so forth. I think that we start to get into this ideological debate that is, I think, destructive of liberalism. So we have to counter the extremes, I think. But yeah, I think they can both be not necessarily combined, but we can have a policy, a liberal policy of social democracy where we're providing for the needy, but we still have a market economy to some extent, and we still have, businesses and corporations and all that. We're not tearing that down. And I think creating a whole entire system as Marx envisioned is probably not going to work. So yeah, in some sense, Jeffrey, yeah, we can combine them in a way that's healthy and good, but also recognize that when liberalism is being attacked ideologically, that's an important point to be aware of, because the problem is not that, there's some distinction between these ideologies or that whether we can do one or another. It's that we have propagandists from both the left and the right, both foreign and domestic, who are inserting messages into our minds through the media and through fundraising appeals and through communications like this that are anti-liberal. And that's the problem, when it becomes an anti-liberal, that the struggle is over our minds and the ideologies and the attitudes that we have. So that when they say attack the individual or when they say neoliberal, right, they're attacking a Democratic candidate. That's just plain and simple. That's what's happening. It's not that the candidate, just because the candidate maybe is insufficiently socialist for the progressive groups. And we end up attacking ourselves. And then we end up on the right, the far right. We end up being Putin apologist, anti-American. We end up supporting anti-Americanism because America is an imperialist country. I just read an article about that. And we end up seeing America as the evil in the world when it's not. And that's the danger here. When
Maybe
we,
But I know we did many bad things during the Cold War. If you know that.
we and everybody in the entire world, and we, because we have more power, have done terrible things. Absolutely. Or not we, the nation, our leaders, you know, we are far from perfect, but when we compare, but we have to compare ourselves to others, right? We're not North Korea. We're not Russia. We're not China. You know,
They done more evil than us.
yeah, I think if you look at the Iron Curtain that runs through Africa, you know, that's all Putin, China, Prigozhin, and their influence in the Southern Hemisphere. But in South America, we have a lot of democracies. Even though we've done bad things and overthrown those democracies, those were terrible errors, terrible mistakes.
No.
You know, we have not been opposed to democracy as China and Russia and North Korea and other dictators are. Our preference for democracy and some of the good things we've done. So it's important not to see us through, not to look at us through rose-colored glasses or through black glasses either. You know, we have done, the world is full of evil, and we have participated, our nation has participated in it. But it doesn't mean that our nation is the evil empire that Putin wants us to believe, or that some socialists want us to believe.
So
We
the
just
West-
need to fix our image.
Well, yeah, I think we're getting there, but we also have to keep from being divided in this country over issues that are pushing us further and further to the right. You know, when the attack on liberalism pushes us further to the right, not to the left. That's the problem. Attacking our liberal foundations undermines our democracy. It doesn't support it. So.
Jana Rose Kelly asked, besides this quote by Angela Davis printed by JBP, are you aware of other attacks on liberalism from individuals on the left?
Well, yeah, I mean, just the neoliberalism is one example I've brought up. And the fact that we are Putin apologists, you know, that we've now are attacking not only individualism, but America as a country, as if we were the evil empire. You know, these are the ideas that come out of the right, as if this conflict in Ukraine were an inter-imperialist conflict and had nothing to do with the rights and freedoms of the Ukrainian people. We can see it coming over and over again. Now, right now, we have these people from Code Pink, right, who are saying, oh, we got to have an investigation over the Nord pipeline disaster, or that whether America targeted this pipeline from Russia to Germany. You know, we don't need to do that. Russia is in a war. You know, if we did that, nobody was killed. No oil was spilled because Russia had already cut it off. So this is the type of thing that we begin to see when we actually listen to what people are saying. You know, if we listen to what people are saying, and that it's highly, highly negative towards the United States, highly, highly negative towards our Constitution, and that is a problem. You know, that it's the excessive negativity that creates negative attitudes and so we get into conflict. People who support America versus people who are opposed to America, who think America is the evil empire, versus people who think America is the great Christian nation. And that's the conflict that we have. And I think that conflict ends up with the both extremes moving farther and further to the right, toward authoritarianism. So America is still the beacon of democracy around the world, although we now have a flawed democracy and are backsliding And that's what we're trying to stop. But yeah, let's see. Rao, and I can't say the first name. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, nice evening here in New Jersey. Yes, I just wondering about what is the feel is level to our citizens. You know what? We make our country is number one, planet Earth, and then planet universe also on the Mars. We are the number one. Nobody won't beat us. No country won't beat us. That's 100% perfect. So we have to make our enemies level ground feel fair. Then our enemies to know our enemies means our different countries, whoever, like North Korea, like whatever it is. Example, they know we are the number one. They already know that we are number one in the universe anyway. All forms of anyway. So our citizen is also number one. They need to we welcome all world country peoples as a red carpet here. We welcome them. They are safe and secure. Their lives is better than their countries. We're making the red carpet living here. But our citizens goes to other countries, our enemies, our friends, our neighbors, whatever it is. I mean, they don't welcome us the red carpet. They want our dollars. They want our jobs. They want our thing. But when our citizens goes there, they don't welcome in the red carpet. They jealousy about our citizens. What we need to do is we don't want to fight with them. We don't want to go war with them. We just need to our ordinary citizens as a number one their country. Number one, when they going to taking the other country by flight, they land over there. They make our citizens the number one red carpet. Thus make the field level. They understand these country people, number one country people coming to visit our country. They are the VIPs, very, very important persons. They need to make that's the way field level. They understand. They never ever dare to come our country. That is
Right.
the politics we have to do. That is the number one. What is the number one? Country means people, peoples means country. Is the country number one? So then people are so number one. There is no difference, but they want our resources, our economy, our jobs, everything, but our citizens not treated by number one their country when we visit there. That is the difference. That is, we must need to focus on it, and then they understand what we are. They never come at look at us like an enemy again. That is social. That is the way. That is the weapon. I understood.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Rao. I was reading an article today that people, we think we're oppressed here in the United States. For a person, I read an article, it's from a person who escaped from North Korea. And she looks at it and says, what the heck are we talking about? We have people coming from socialist countries, and America is oppressive. It boggles their minds, So, Samuel, go ahead and unmute here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. It's a little muffled, though.
It is a problem because there's some meetings I can't hear me at all. And you say put it in the chat, so I want to be sure you can hear me.
Okay. So you put the question in the chat, Samuel?
I did put the question in chat, and I want to be sure to respond to it. Thank you.
Okay. Do you see the question, Mom?
Oh, I finally found it.
Okay, what is it?
Okay, it's a little long. Wait a minute. Have you read Bob Avakian's book, which separates the new communism from the traditional or Stalinist communism? I assume you dislike socialism as you find it to communism. There is an organization of social democrats. Avakian believes in a wait a minute, let me get.
It's Avakian, I think.
Democracy, which a new, better structure of elections.
I worked with Refuse Fascism, and that's where I met Samuel when they were working to impeach Donald Trump. And when people on the left were saying ridiculous things like Trump is just a symptom, and the Poor People's Campaign was refused, did not allow their participants to engage in work to impeach Donald Trump, when we absolutely needed to hold that man accountable. He was a threat to our democracy at the earliest points. And so I was frustrated. I was thankful that Refuse Fascism was out there working to impeach Donald Trump. Hi, Benjamin. I see your hand up, and I'll get to you. Okay. So I really think that, but I'm not too fond of Bob Avakian. I've listened to his stuff a little bit, and it's very wordy. And there's a issue on the left that the idea that you just list a group of grievances, list all these grievances, and then you come to the conclusions that, America is evil or something. But people can list grievances all over the place. And but having a balanced view where we see both sides, see both the good and the bad, I think is important. And I have not read Bob Avakian's book. And from what I've read of him, I find it repetitive and just a list of things, and with no real logical connections being drawn. And so that's why I don't like Bob Avakian. But I haven't read it, so I can't really comment on his book. Okay, Benjamin, did you want to say something?
Yeah. So I do remember something about Trump. Trump wants to keep us on the left and not the right, because Trump and his extreme mega Republicans are trying to use it for power. But if they did, then why are they trying to get in control of the Constitution and democracy from having us to stand on the left and not on the right?
Okay. Run that by me a little bit again, Benjamin. I'm trying to understand it as best as can. Why is the right trying to do what? Okay,
so my question was, why is Trump wants us to stay on the left instead of on the right side?
Okay, well, I'm going to try. See, Trump is a right-wing person. He's more about himself, really, and he's using propaganda. He's a propagandist, plain and simple. Trump is a huge propagandist, and he's appealing to the worst parts of America. Okay, but on the left, we have people who, Putin has his hands in a lot of things. Where do people get their money from? Who are there pushing his agenda? And part of it is ideological, that they really believe America is the imperialist evil empire. And part of it is just they listen to Putin's anti-Western world, anti-American, anti-NATO propaganda. And so what happens is on the left, we get repeated Putin's propaganda by people who have developed over the years a negative attitude towards the United States and towards America. So over the years, with this indoctrination of these anti-liberal, anti-American sort of messages, because we have to be critical. There's one thing about being critical. It's another thing to be excessively negative. So we can be critical and speak truth to power without being condemning the entire system and our entire nation and its history, and any action that it takes, becomes America can do no good in the world. No, America can do good in the world. And so what we end up with is that When America wants to overthrow a democracy, or when the politicians in power want to overthrow a democracy in another country, nobody stops them. But the moment that we want to support a democracy or help support a country that's being attacked by a fascist nation, we get a bunch of people on the left screaming, so that the injection into this is not just from Trump, but other domestic and foreign propagandists instilling in us negative attitudes towards our own country, towards our own people, and towards the entire Western world. And at that point, we are in a major problem. We have now become part of the far right, or part of the fascist agenda. Because if you go too far on the extremes, it's more like a triangle. There's a point when you go too far that they meet, that fascism and revolutionary radical ideas taken to extremes end up meeting each other. And liberalism is it's the antidote to authoritarianism. That's what it was created for, and that's what it is. So we need to defend our liberal democracy here, and not condemn our country.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Why are the Republicans are trying to take it all away from us?
Take our what away from us?
Take away our democracy and voting rights from us.
He's saying, why are the mega extremists trying to take our democracy away?
Well, they're under the influence of far-right propaganda, and I think that they are deceived, basically, but that that they've been told that democracy is threatened, and they feel threatened, and some of them are racist. I mean, when we talk about far-right extremists, we're not really talking about conservatives necessarily. There are a lot of conservatives who are not far-right extremists, and so the far-right extremist, that's the problem when we get far-right controlling the narrative. Trump has been pumping them up. They've been spreading their propaganda. And because I think in some parts they're narcissists, and want power and feel threatened. But most of it, I think, is because they've been indoctrinated by Trump's propaganda, Putin's propaganda. There's an infiltration, and there's a human desire to be a part of something, to have power, and they play to those human emotions and human psychology in a way that taps into the dark side of that human body. It taps into bigotry, racism, hatred, fear, that they're professionals who know how to tap into that and create people who will fight against their own interest. And we've seen that all the time, and will fight against freedom, even though.
So we need people who could tap into the light of people.
Yes, and have a more positive attitude, be more positive about America and about our principles and the way we choose to live. Thank you, Benjamin. I want to get everybody away in time for the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's only 2 minutes.
Or Puppy Bowl.
Don't miss that either.
Right.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Okay, remember to register for our next program on character disturbance, and you can do that at tinyurl.com/disturbed character.
Can you put that in the chat box?
Sure. Let me see if I can do that. Okay, here it is.
Okay, so.
All right. Well, probably time to pack up your stuff. Jesse should be on his way.
All right, that should do it. That should be it. That should work. Let's see. Yep, that's it. So go ahead and register for that. And if you want to save the chat, it's down. You can do that down at the lower right-hand corner.
Hold on, I got some for you. I found this one. I found this.
What's that?
How to fund your project, like what you're doing.
Oh, great. Well, why don't we talk about that later, okay?
Yeah, I thought since you're having trouble, I thought I could share that with you.
Okay, good. Hold on to it and maybe email it to me.
Well, I just put it in the chat box. So
you just put it in the chat box? Okay, let me take a look there. All right. Love and appreciate each other. Thank you, Maria. I'm not seeing it in, where is it, Jeffrey?
It should be sent to you directly.
Okay,
Richard Procida.
all right, I'll look it up. I'll save the chat. I'll get a copy of the
I
chat.
don't see where you saved the chat.
Yeah, it's in the right-hand corner. Yeah, I don't know where it is, but it's there. It should be in the right-hand corner. There's 3 dots under the chat that should allow you to save it.
Copy or quote.
Yeah, well, it may not be on yours, Mom, because you're a co-host.
Oh,
Well, I just shared it with the co-host and everyone.
All right. Thank
so
you,
now,
Jeffrey.
So now you should be able to see it, hopefully.
Okay. All right. Enjoy the game, everybody. Thank you for coming. See you next time. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
You're welcome.
David. Thank you, Ralph, David.